You know deep down inside you would be happier without this poison flushing around your system on a daily basis. You know that you would have more money in your pocket, more time awake, less time crashed out in a drunken paralysis. You know how wonderful it would feel not to care if you have a drink today or not. So why don't you deal with it? Simple. Because at the moment you associate more pain with removing alcohol than you associate pleasure with stopping drinking. Because of the never-ending needs and demands of the ego, this perception of what constitutes pleasure and pain is always shifting. The most likely reason that you purchased this book is that you encountered what I call a threshold moment. Essentially, something happened that temporarily altered the balance of the scales. This is an event so traumatic that it causes unbearable amounts of pain that sends you into a massive, determined period of change. Let me give you a few examples of threshold moments in relation to drinking before I give you my own. Life is cruising along nicely in your usual blinkered and ironic state, where you're actually aware that you're drinking far too much and probably doing serious damage to your health, career, and loved ones. And yet you still reach for the bottle of wine every night as soon as you get home. You're happy to ignore all the warning signs in favor of blind ignorance. Then one night you're sitting watching television, your ego sedated and comfortably numb by the glass of mild anesthetic grasped comfortably in your hand. Your 5-year-old daughter comes up to you with a carefully and proudly drawn picture. It's a colourful drawing of you, her daddy. In the picture, you are slumped in front of the television and in your hand, a bottle of wine. Bang! Suddenly it hits you like a ton of bricks. This is how your own child sees you. Through her pure, innocent eyes, she sees you for the real addict that you are. Children have no binding compulsion to pull any punches or to spare your feelings. They just tell it how it is. Children are blank canvases, and they learn in their formative years solely by watching us, the grown-ups, the sensible ones. This social pleasantry that has made us utterly miserable is here now because it has been passed down through generations as a curse wrapped up in shiny paper and labelled as a gift. The reason this book gets updated annually is because every year thousands more people use it to help them stop drinking. Many of them send me their stories, and the collective wisdom of us ex-drinkers is worth more than the sum of their parts. This is a heartbreaking story I was emailed only a week ago from Linda. That's not her real name, as she's asked to remain anonymous. Linda grew up with an alcoholic mother and later went on to have her own struggle with drink until she joined my online club last year. If you're a parent and you wonder how your drinking affects your children, Linda's story is difficult but vital for you to listen to. Being brought up by my alcoholic mother has had a profound effect on my own self-perception and my relationship with alcohol. My childhood is a combination of good versus bad, but alcohol made the world around me evil. I was protected from nothing and exposed to all as a result of having no parents to shelter me. Alcohol made my childhood a living nightmare. It took away the amazing, loving, proud mother I had and gave me a woman that I was mortified to be associated with. I remember seeing her tears, her worries over money, anxiety in social situations, and what was the answer? Always alcohol. That was her answer each time, no matter the devastation caused by the last binge. She was so embroiled in the vicious pattern that she couldn't be a mother. I grew up being able to do whatever I wanted, and there were no consequences for my actions, as my mum was a drunk. She would turn up drunk to formal meetings with my principal, but then forget the conversations about my behaviour had even happened, so I got away with everything. This all accumulated into a general lack of respect I had for anyone and even myself. I respected no one and listened to no one. No one cared for me, and after all, if your parents can't be there for you, who can? More than a lack of respect for others, I didn't respect or love myself. My mother never took the time to emotionally invest in me, which left me feeling unworthy of love, so I rebelled to get the attention I craved. My mother's drinking took her away from me. She didn't see the child I was. She didn't acknowledge my achievements. She didn't even attend my sporting events, all because alcohol got in the way. I was dragged up in a world no child should ever have to witness. When she wasn't drinking, she was the mum I loved and the best mother on the planet. She would apologize, have a movie day, buy us sweets, tell us it would never happen again, but it always did. As a result of my upbringing, I went through a decade of my life unable to have a few drinks with my friends. I went from entering the bar to being paralytic, as I had no control over my drinks. The way I've been brought up is you drink until you are unconscious. There is no middle ground. It took years to bring this behavior under control, and even now, alcohol scares me, and that's why I joined your club. I lost my childhood, and so much more because of my mother's addiction to alcohol. I would not wish any child to experience the life I did with my mum. Regardless of the world she brought me up in, I still love her, as I know somewhere deep inside she is still there. But alcohol has won this battle, and I only hope it won't win the war. From Linda. Whether you have your own child's super honest portrait of you pinned on the refrigerator door right now, or perhaps Linda's story has made you question your own behavior, these sorts of events can be considered for many to be what I call a threshold moment. An event so powerfully painful that it forces you to change. The pain versus pleasure scales take a dramatic nudge in one direction, and your perception of what you're doing changes enough for you to take action. Normally, people on the road to giving up attractively packaged poison have several increasingly severe threshold moments along the way. Let me tell you what my own personal threshold moment was like. I am wonderfully blessed, and it could be said that I have been guilty in the past of not appreciating that, and being fantastically blasé about my two wonderful children, who when I first wrote this book were 11 and 7 years old. Without a modicum of ego here, I can tell you that they looked up to me like I was faultless. My wife at the time of writing this book was medically retired, and so I was the sole provider in our household. I can't tell you how many fun days out there could have been that I never allowed to happen because I just couldn't see a way for that day to include alcohol. I don't want to torture myself by considering how many options I took purely because they did include a drink. Option A might have been more fun for my children, and option C might have been more enjoyable for my wife at the time. But in the past, if option B included alcohol, then that was the only choice I took, because I couldn't see anything being enjoyable without a drink. At this point, I will remind you that while I'm sharing this with you, I don't believe in beating yourself up with your mistakes of the past. The past is very important, in as much as it brought you to where you are right now, but it has absolutely no relevance on tomorrow. Just because I made bad decisions in the past does not mean I'm compelled to make them again now, tomorrow, or at any point in the future. Every dawn brings an exciting new opportunity for you to get it right. Trust me, I know you are at the start of a tough journey, but the commitment you have made just by investing your money in this audiobook, money that you could quite have easily just spent on your favorite brand of booze, is a dramatic and profound statement of intent. Remember, as Woody Allen says, 80% of success is just turning up. So if you're here as a result of a painful threshold moment, don't let that pain subside enough for you to believe that purchasing this audiobook is enough to make a difference. Absorb it over and over. Use the subliminal tools available from my website to help you alter your programming around alcohol. Every time you observe the ego and catch it in the act of attempting to take over control of your choices, you reduce its power by a fraction of 1%. If you consistently keep doing this over time, I know that the future is bright. Every day is worth living. And if you don't believe me, try missing just one of them. When I became a dad, I was determined to be closer to my children than my own dad was with me. I would always be here. I would be that kind of dad that they could turn to no matter what. I would be the sort of father who took his son fishing and his daughter to see the latest pop concert. My children and my ex-wife would be safe, secure and happy. They would never have to worry about bills or whether we could afford this or that. I would work as hard as is needed just to make it all happen. What I never considered in this grand plan was what would happen if you took me out of the equation. What if I was not around to provide for and protect my family? In 1997, I had to consider that that situation could be a very real and likely possibility. This was my threshold moment. At this point, I was drinking in the region of 2 bottles of wine a day. Of course, I was still lying to myself profusely. I figured that because I had no urge to drink first thing in the morning, and my drinking in no way affected my work, I could not be an alcoholic. If I'm honest, I didn't and still don't like the word alcoholic. For me, it describes the guy lying in the gutter swilling cheap whiskey from a brown paper bag. That's not me. I could not possibly have a serious drink problem. I was the director of 2 companies. I'd just been appointed to the board of a children's charity. And yet, every evening, as soon as I got home, I opened the first bottle of wine and gulped the first half down like it was the first gasp of oxygen to a freediver returning from the depths of the deep blue. By the time I fell into bed, the second bottle would be nearly empty. Perhaps I'd throw away the last mouthful, just so if my wife asked, I could honestly say that I'd not downed full 2 bottles of wine. I consider myself to be a relatively intelligent person, and yet here I was throwing away a mouthful of wine just so I could face my spouse at the time and lie with a free conscience. It's amazing how tunnel vision we become, how we ignore the unnatural behaviour we should recognise as a warning sign. At the height of my own problem, I couldn't even contemplate a night at the movies without a drink. Cinemas are full of popcorn, sweets, and supersized buckets of fizzy drinks, but rarely can you take an alcoholic drink into the movie. This was a problem for me, although it seemed normal at the time. After a hard day at work, I didn't think it was fair that I should be deprived of my evening drink by a movie. I would sometimes buy a quarter bottle of whiskey and pour it into one of those big gulp colas and sip it all the way through the movie. Once alcohol takes hold of you, it never lets go. The grip is always tightened. Don't assume your situation will get better in time. If you ignore the problem now, it can only get worse. In January 1997, after a particularly heavy festive season, I started to get a dull ache in my right abdomen, just under my right rib. I dismissed it as 100 different minor, insignificant medical problems, from a bit of food poisoning to an intolerance to wheat. I even considered paying $300 for a food allergy blood test. In summary, I considered everything apart from the bleeding obvious. I refused to consider that the 140 units of alcohol a week were destroying my insides, the same way alcohol destroys all life at a cellular level. In February 1997, the dull ache was preventing me getting to sleep, and I started searching the internet for my symptoms. As I scanned the possible reasons for a pain in this region, I suddenly became genuinely scared. Website after website suggested liver cancer, liver failure, liver cirrhosis, pancreatic failure, alcohol-induced gallbladder disease. The list went on and on, all horrific illnesses, all caused by alcohol, and many were irreversible. I made an appointment to see my doctor. In my lifetime, I've never had anything seriously wrong with me. I've only ever been to the doctor for a cold or a simple chest infection. My past experiences with the medical profession mean I always confidently expect to be told that the condition will clear up on its own, or that a short dose of antibiotics would be all that is needed. But this time, it was different. I sat in the doctor's waiting room shaking with fear. I walked in and explained my symptoms. He asked how much I was drinking. I lied. I said I used to drink a lot, but now I have no more than a glass of wine a night. Can you believe that? Even at this point, I still lied. Of course you can. You still do it all the time, don't you? This is the power of the drug that we freely hand out to children at celebrations as a treat to make them feel grown up. In honest fear of my life, face to face with a medical professional who was there to help me, I still lied to protect my opportunity to drink. Despite the fact that it was slowly killing me, I couldn't cope with the possibility that it would be taken away from me, so I lied to the doctor. Now, if you're not from the United Kingdom, let me explain that doctors in England are normally seen at the cost of the state on the National Health Service. Doctor surgeries are usually oversubscribed and getting an appointment is sometimes difficult. My allocated time with Dr. White was 5 minutes. Behind me, there were 7 other patients, all waiting in turn for their own 5 minutes. After 35 minutes of examinations and questions, I knew this was strange. I knew this was going to be a very different experience than I was used to at the doctor's. I still expected, even after all the fuss, for the doctor to nod reassuringly and say, "Well, I've checked you over and you seem fine. Come back in a month if it doesn't improve." Dr. White didn't do that. He had a concerned but kind face, and he looked up from his notes over his small round glasses and said, "There is a very real possibility here that there is something serious behind your pain. I don't have the facilities here to examine you to the level I need to, so I'm going to have you sent to the gastroenterology department at the hospital." Hospital? Surely not. I mean, that's where sick people go, right? The health service is overstretched as it is. Surely they wouldn't waste a valuable bed on someone young and healthy like me. As I walked home, neither cured nor reassured, this was the point when I realised this was not a figment of my imagination. I had possibly, seriously, damaged my body by selfishly drinking my attractively packaged poison. I sat at home and I watched my children play. I felt like my heart had been ripped out. Knowing how much I loved my family, how could I do that to them? How could I leave my children without a father? How could I be so selfish that I would make my children go through the pain of watching my funeral? How could I be so pathetic that I would risk making my wife a single parent with 2 devastated children to look after and no income? I'm not ashamed to tell you that my world was ripped apart that evening, and I cried myself to sleep in a world of self-pity, regret and guilt. This was my ultimate threshold moment. It altered the balance of all things. For a brief time, the pain of continuing to drink was greater than the pain of living without my drug. I stopped drinking for 8 weeks, and the pain subsided a little. The hospital performed dozens of blood tests and scans, and I was awaiting a liver biopsy because my enzymes were all over the place, a clear indication that my liver was in trauma. The problem with relying on a threshold event to cure your problem is, as soon as the pain generated by the threshold begins to fade, your determination to stick to your goals fades too, and you're back in the hands of good old-fashioned willpower. Let me tell you here and now, willpower is no friend of yours or mine. Willpower is civil war because it breaks a human need rule. It breaks the law of scarcity, and I'll explain about that in greater detail later on in the book, but for the moment, if you want proof that you are fighting a losing battle trying to stop drinking with willpower, let me prove it to you. The classic self-help process that relies on willpower the most is dieting. When you look in the mirror and you decide you need to shed some weight, as soon as you start restricting the amount of food that you are allowed, the body goes into shock. Suddenly, the subconscious assumes there is a dramatic shortage of food. This scenario is in direct conflict with your primary functional need to stay alive at all costs. The brain, thinking you are in the middle of a famine, starts applying pressure in the form of pain to get you to reverse the situation. Subconsciously, you are in preservation mode. It is irrelevant to you that you want to lose weight, or even that might be even beneficial for you to drop down a dress size or 2. Your subconscious does not rationalize, it does not judge, it just completes tasks. This is why 95% of people who go on a calorie-restrictive diet not only put the weight back on within 5 years, but on average add an additional 5 pounds. So the threshold pain faded for me, and I was left with nothing in my arsenal but willpower. I started to drink again. But this time I had a new system. Alcohol is a creative little poison, and it had come up with a brilliant new way for me to carry on flirting with her at a new safe level. I bought a lockable drinks cabinet and loaded it with single measures of whiskey. I gave the key to my ex-wife and explained that I was only allowed 1 measure a night, and if I asked her for more, she was to say no. It worked well. For a whole week. Well worth the $250 that I spent on the cabinet. The plan fell down when my wife went out with friends for an evening and she took the key with her. I felt cheated because I'd not even had a single drink. She was breaking the rules, not me. I was allowed 1 a day. How dare she do this to me? I was like a petulant child, and it didn't take me long to realize that the back of the cabinet was made of cheap plywood, and it was only tacked into place. A simple bit of leverage with a steak knife, and the panel lifted up enough to squeeze a small bottle out. From this point on, the new plan was dead. Within 3 weeks, I was drinking back at my usual level. The pain was back and stronger than ever, and more tests eventually revealed that if I didn't want to risk liver failure within 2 to 3 years, I had to stop drinking immediately. I stopped drinking for 3 weeks and started again. Even faced with a death sentence, I still couldn't see how giving up booze was a life worth living. I can't order you to stop drinking. Your wife or husband screaming at you won't stop you drinking. Your children begging you still won't make you see sense. Even you grasping the nettle and deciding to give up and resist temptation is futile. The only way you can live without this drug is to fundamentally change your opinion of it. You need to see it for what it really is, attractively packaged poison. You've probably tried to give up or cut down in the past and failed. This is because at the end of the day, you still want it. You still need it. You still desire it. You still believe that alcohol is some way benefiting you. I've heard every excuse going from people just like you and just like me. I can't sleep without a drink before bed. I need it to relax. I'm boring without a drink. Drinking gives me confidence. Drinking helps me chill out after a hard day at work. These are all lies, and deep down inside, you know they are. If you are currently using any of these statements to justify your drinking, from now on, see them as evidence that you are currently sitting inside a giant mousetrap, resolutely believing that you are perfectly safe. The day that you stop seeing alcohol as a benefit and seeing it for what it really is the day that you will start to become free. As you work with me during this book, you will slowly begin to become aware that alcohol no longer tastes as good as it used to. You'll start noticing the unpleasant taste that you've previously learned to ignore. Often members of my online club report a strange sensation of disappointment with their drink. The harshness of the poison will slowly become more and more dominant over the heaps of sugar and fruit that the drinks companies use to disguise the drug hidden within. It may sound unbelievable to you at this point, but using my system, you will get to the point where you find the taste of alcoholic drinks unappealing, disappointing, and often just plain disgusting. Just like you did when you first took a sneaky sip of your father's beer when you were younger.